Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'm going to be going through today is sort of a brief explanation of what you should definitely be including in your investigation, but also how to calculate and display the graphs that you will need within Microsoft Excel. So as a starter, the bare minimum for the graphs that you want to include is that you want to include, first of all, the table of your two data sets that you're going to compare. You're also going to need to include a frequency table, which will be created with your frequency graphs for each of your different data sets. You'll also need to do a side-by-side stem and leaf plot, and you will need a parallel box plots with your 5 number summaries. So this is just a bare minimum of what you should definitely include in your investigation, and I'm going to go through now how to include all of that using Excel. So first off, you want your two sets of data. So here I'm looking at the cricket scores from the Strikers and the cricket scores from the Hurricanes. Now, if I want to make a frequency graph, so a histogram from this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Insert, which is at the top here. I'm going to highlight all of my first set of data, and I'm going to insert and go over here to histogram, and I'm going to insert that. Now what I'm going to do straight away is I'm going to label this as Striker so that I don't get confused. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change the size of the bins which are down here on our histograms. Now the reason why I'm doing that is because automatically Excel makes your histograms with 4 bins. But in most of your cases, that's not really going to be a great indication of what your data is going to look like. So if we right click down here where our numbers are and we go Format Axes, that's going to give us a whole bunch of information on the right here. What we can do is we can actually change here the amount of bins that are actually included. Now what I would recommend is probably 5 bins should be enough to get a pretty good representation of your data. So if you change this number of bins to 5, it should spread your data out enough so that you can evaluate a reasonable skew of your different data sets. So that's what I got for my Strikers. Now I'm going to do the exact same for the Hurricanes. I'm going to insert a histogram. Okay, I'm going to title this straight away so that I don't forget which one's which. Okay, and then I'm going to right click down with my numbers, Format Axes, and change the number of bins to 5. Okay, as you can see in doing that, we've got a more accurate view of the skews of our two different data sets. Okay, so we can see a pretty clear skew of our data from the Strikers, and we can see a pretty reasonable skew of our Hurricanes here. I'm not going to tell you what the skews are for these two, but we've definitely gone through what these two skews look like in our statistics section. So if you're unsure, go back to the OneNote page where we looked at positively skewed, negatively skewed, or symmetrical data. Work out which one is represented in your data set so that you can compare the two in your discussions. But you should definitely be including histograms for both of your data sets. Now, importantly, make sure you are labeling your histograms correctly. So you're labeling, giving them both a title. You're also labeling your horizontal axis and your vertical axis as well. Okay. Now, following from your frequency graphs, you should have next to that, either before that or after that, your frequency table. So how you construct this frequency table, remember that it's a histogram, so we're looking at continuous data. So we have to do our intervals that contain our data. Now, the way that we work out what these intervals are is we just look directly at our frequency graphs that we've just created. So we can see here our first bin is from 98 to 106.8. So for our frequency scores, that's going to go between 98 and 106.8. Then moving on, our next one is between 106.8 and 115.6, which is exactly what it says on our frequency histogram. So you need to make your way through writing down your intervals of your scores or your data, whatever it is, and then next to it, writing down their frequencies, which are read straight off of the frequency graphs that have been created. So you need to include your frequency graphs, include your frequency tables with the intervals correctly labeled and the frequencies correctly labeled as well. Okay, what you can do from that information is that you can then interpret your results. You can compare your two data sets, and particularly you should definitely talk about what the skews of both of your data look like. Okay, if you're unsure about also how to put these intervals into Word, you can actually go insert equation, which is also available on Word. That's going to make a little box for you here. And then you can actually create your inequality signs in there really easily. So if I wanted to do 98 is less than or equal to S, I would use the less than sign, which is right next to the M button on your keyboard. Less than, and then I would just do an equals, and that would give me a less than or equals to sign. Then if I wanted to do S, again, I would just include S, and then I would do less than or equals to next to that as well. But if you're inserting that into your equation mode, it's going to automatically turn that into a less than or equals to sign, as we can see right here. Okay. Your stem and leaf plots, that's completely up to you how you set those out. It might be easier for you to actually construct them in Microsoft Word, but you should definitely have your titles for both of your data, so which one is which. You need to have a reasonable scale for the data that you have, and you need to have a scale at the end that clearly represents what your stem and leaf plot is trying to convey. Okay, then of course you have your 5-number summaries for both. So 5-number summary for the Strikers, 5-number summary for my Hurricanes. Then I would make a parallel box plots for both of my data sets. The reason why I would make them parallel is because you're trying to compare the two data sets, and putting them side by side on a parallel box plots, it's going to make it much easier to compare the spread of the data as well as to compare those middle values as well. Okay, making sure that in your box plot you've got a title for your box plots, you're clearly defining which one is which, and you're labeling your different 5-number summaries on there with a reasonable scale at the bottom. Now, one of the easiest ways to make your box plots is just using an online program. So if you Google box plot grapher and you just put in your 5-number summaries that you've calculated in your graphics calculator, that will give you some pretty decent box plots. It's a little bit more complex in Excel, so I would recommend that you use something like that. But if you find an alternative method that covers all of those things, that's completely fine as well. Okay, in terms of what you should include apart from this, well, after each graph, you should definitely state what you used to make the graph. So how did you construct it and why you used that sort of graph to display your results. So why are you using a box plot? Why is that useful for you? And then following that, what does that actually tell you? Why have we included it? What's the key information that it provides us to actually help us answer the question? So you've got your investigations, you've made a question, you want to actually find an answer to something by comparing two data sets. So you need to actually link all of your graphs when you're interpreting them back to the question. So they should always be there as evidence to try and answer your question. Okay, so you should be using key terms that we've used so far, like skew, spread. Those are the sorts of things that you should be using to compare, because at the very end, you've got to actually state your answer to your initial problem. Okay, make sure that all of your graphs are fully labeled. So you've got your axes, your 5-number summaries, your titles, all of that good stuff. And then this is particularly for an A-level investigation. You should definitely include, after your box plots, how did you actually calculate the mean, the median, and the standard deviation and the interquartile range? Okay, so it's all well and good to use your calculator to do your calculations for the box plots and the 5-number summaries. But for that A grade response, you need to go further and you need to actually look at the mathematics behind the calculations. Okay, that's showing more depth of understanding of the content rather than just looking at graphs and looking at tables and analyzing it from your graphics calculators. Okay, so I hope that was useful for you in terms of how to construct your different graphs and what you should include in your investigation. And I wish you all the best. See you later.